You ready? All right, thank you everyone for coming. I'm excited to introduce my uncle. So just a little bit about him. Ricky grew up in the suburb of Baltimore, Maryland, where he met his wife Eudice at the age of 8. They have 5 children, 3 of whom studied in the Jerusalem Sudbury School. Following high school, Ricky moved to Israel and lived on a kibbutz and served in the Israeli Defense Force for 4.5 years. He studied liberal arts at the Baltimore Hebrew and Goucher College. Part of his studies included education courses towards teaching certification. Ricky worked in a variety of educational settings, both formal and informal. Ricky worked in various jobs, including the Ministry of Defense, fundraising for the Mayor of Jerusalem, director of production at a small high-tech company, and later as a quality testing engineer, technical writer, group leader, and integration engineer at NDS, a high-tech company in the broadcasting field. Ricky has been interested in alternative education since high school and has always aspired to work in the field. He is a founder of the Jerusalem Sudbury School, which opened its doors in 2002. Ricky was very active in the nonprofit of the school and joined the staff in 2007. Ricky lives in Jerusalem and recently retired from the school after 10 years. He spends his time babysitting his granddaughter while pursuing a writing and speaking career. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Laurie. That's fun. Thank you for your enthusiastic welcome. Oops. So this is based on a talk I gave in Hong Kong. The subject is a passion of mine, actually. Not just because I worked in the high-tech field, but because I was the first person of everyone I knew that owned a computer, an Apple IIe. 8 pages of text, and it froze. Okay, so it was something that my wife kept saying, "Why do you own this thing? What purpose does it serve?" And so I'm not so interested in that kind of thing now from the point of view of technology, but I am very interested from the point of view of families, society, and education. Before I start, really, I just want to say that my talk really comes down to the word values. It's all about values. That's what it's always about. How you envision your life, what kind of life you want to lead, what kind of person you want to be, what kind of family you want to raise, how you relate as an example to your family or as a staff person, how you relate to the kids at school. We are, as adults, we're always being looked at by younger people. They look and they learn, and we're studied thoroughly, and they often know things about us that we don't know about ourselves. So that's I think is the main theme that's going through the talk. Okay. So in the last 7 years, there's been a growing hysteria among parents about the subject of devices, the use of all kinds of mobile devices. Now it's this, yeah? It's this. This is what everybody's got. And people are saying all kinds of things like, my kid's becoming a zombie. They don't talk face to face with their buddies, and they're gaming all the time. It's just they don't look me in the eye. They look at their phone. There's all kinds of things people are saying. I'm not talking about like scientific health, specific health implications of using the phone based on radiation, things like that. That's not part of my talk. There's a lot of scientific literature. I don't think it's very conclusive. On the staff of the school that I worked in, we have a veterinarian. Now, she's a medical doctor, so she understands the literature. And so she did a survey, and she didn't really find much to talk about from the medical perspective. On the issue of sociological perspective, children, society, education, there's just conflicting claims all over the place. So I don't really look to that per se to form my ideas and my opinions. I do take it into account. I like to read, especially the articles in the New Yorker, New York Times, the Atlantic Monthly, things that come out in Israel. So I read those with a lot of curiosity to see what people are saying and thinking. What truly boggles my mind is that people are, not people, I mean parents, that come into the school, they come in with concerns. Every single parent comes with concerns based on their own experience and their perception of the things that their kids are doing. So they talk about in hysterical terms, blown out of proportion, and I feel a lot less pain. But yet I don't personally do much about it, and every time I try, I always go backward, which is why I think it's addictive also, not just me. Robert Lustig thinks it's addictive as well. So what's going on here with parents? So why aren't they bringing this up? So I'm thinking that, well, sugar is something that we all know about. My mom would say, eat your dinner before you can have dessert, right? That's what they say. That's normal. We look at our diets. We get hit by it all the time in the news. It's always on a subject that we hear about all the time. Doctors talk about it. Everybody's talking about it, and so it's something we're very familiar with. Now, myself, I don't know the ages of everybody in the room, but I'm 61, and you might be close.
Kind of.
Okay, and I grew up. There were no computers. They're in a society that's just largely exploding with devices now. The change is so rapid; it's impossible to keep up. You have to be. There are professionals who are responsible for keeping up with the technological changes, but we can't. But there's a sugar. We're experts. We're experts in sugar. We're experts in food. We grew up with it. We know what we're talking about. But here we're being confronted with this tremendous new reality, which is hard for me to adjust to, and a lot of people. And parents didn't grow up with a device in their hands, whereas our kids now have grown up with these devices. In fact, the average age, I know in America, for getting a smartphone for kids is 10 plus a bit. And you see kids 6, 5, 6, 7 with phones. I imagine in the school that's the case as well. So I think it's the issue of familiarity, and that's where the hysteria comes in. So prior to 2012, just one thing here. I'm going to talk a lot about my Sudbury School, but really I consider it, in terms of the broader society, extreme sounds negative, radical self-directed education. That's how I'd like to frame it, because that in a school setting. What happens in the home is one thing. I'm not an expert on that, but I understand that also exists. Unschooling, self-directed education, that exists at home. In terms of an educational setting, I guess, in my opinion, we're the most radical. It's the most suitable for me personally. So it's basically you can it's the same. If I say Sudbury or self-directed education, I mean the same thing. Prior to 2012 in our school, parents weren't too upset about computers. The people that were upset were parents of boys that are around the age of 9, 10, 11 to 13, 14, because their kids were on computers and they were gaming. They were the ones gaming. And the funny thing is that I sat with my wife, who works in the field for many, many years, and we both looked at, well, are there any kids that continued gaming in high school like that? Like literally, like they're in the room pretty much all day, okay, in the computer room in the school. And we saw, no. The interesting thing is they didn't. That they came out of this and picked their heads up and said, oh, there's other stuff going on. I prefer to do other stuff now. A lot of it was socially oriented, but all kinds of other things. They were doing all kinds of other things as well. My son spent 8 months in the computer room at our school, and Matan, and we were looking at what they were doing, and what they were doing is there was 1.5 computers, literally. They put together, and there was one kid who was much older, he used to run a gaming forum, and he's a great guy, Michael Sapir, and he would sit and they'd talk and they'd chat and they'd exchange information. There was a lot of cooperation. It's never it's, I can't say never, but I can say it's so rarely about one individual opposite a computer. It's about community. They exchange ideas, they love what they do, and they're very passionate about it. And that's what they want to do, but they're talking to their friends either today online or in the room itself. Smartphones have changed everything. So I can provide you with sources for statistics that I took off the web, but since was it 2015, sales of smartphones were 1.5 billion units worldwide, and it was all the other devices, tablets, desktops, and laptops, were only 0.5 billion together. In 2017, half of the web access was made through a smartphone. So it's here, and it's here to stay. But that's obvious to everybody. But in terms of family, I want to talk about how I view the smartphone in relation to my family, because I could have gotten when was this? In the early 2000s, I could have gotten computers. I had a friend who was refurbishing computers. He was getting donations, and he would have given me as many as I wanted. And maybe if it cost him some $100, I would have given him $100. But I refused. I had a conversation with my wife, and we decided that this isn't something we really want to do because it didn't fit in with the values of our household. We ended up having one computer and a laptop when I came home from work. We had one TV. And all during this time I was watching families, friends, and what was going on with them and their kids. And I saw something which I call digital creep. And the digital devices were creeping into their bedrooms. So it often starts, so we have in the Jewish tradition b'nai mitzvahs, bar and bat mitzvahs. When a kid turns 12 or 13, they come of age in the Jewish faith, and they come in front of the community. There's some prayers and talks, but that's an opportunity to give gifts. So what happens is they get a television. In the beginning it was a TV, then it was a desktop, then it was a laptop. And these same parents were giving these devices to their kids, complain, well, my kid doesn't spend time with me now. Okay, yeah, because you gave them all this great stuff, and now they're in the room. I met a guy who worked in Oracle Corporation on a flight. And whenever I meet these guys from, these successful high-tech guys, and he was flying all over the world, he did interface with customers and handled issues relating to data and big data and databases. I say, what do you do in your family? How do you handle this? He goes, oh, that's real easy. We only have 1 or 2 computers. They're in the living areas. They're in public areas. The kids can use them, but they can't. But they're not in the bedrooms. There's one television. He told me that when they're at dinner, no one can have a device on them. If it rings, if your phone rings, you do the dishes. He told me that when they take a lot of trips, camping trips, they go visit tourist sites in Israel and abroad. They have a very active cultural life in their family, and a lot of travel. And yeah, the kids have, in the car, they might be with their device. He gave his kids smartphones when they turned 8, because in the 3rd grade, they had, I don't know what you guys have here, everything's WhatsApp in America. I don't know what you guys use here, same WhatsApp or similar platforms. Right. Okay, so there's WhatsApp groups already in 3rd grade, so he made sure his kids had a smartphone in the 3rd grade. He himself always came home, even though he worked crazy hours. I know these guys, and they work, really, it's, the golden handcuffs, they work crazy hours. And he would come home when his kids were very little. He would come home every day for 3 hours, eat dinner with the family, give baths to the kids, put them to bed, and then go back to work. He made sure he lived close enough to work that he was able to do this. He basically took his values, what kind of family, and envisioned what kind of family he wanted to raise, and then came and actually was present for the children. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to values in the family. The conversation was great. Unfortunately, I lost his business card, but he's very cool. Okay. Okay. So in our family, that's how we approached life. But then you start talking about you know self-directed education, and self-directed education requires a bit of a change because now we're going to okay. So there's an educational framework, whether it's in the home, in a homeschooling cooperative, in a Sudbury school or any other kind of school, and what do we do with this I would say more formal way of doing things. Now, if it's homeschooling, obviously it's less formal. But if it's in a school, it's you drop the kids off in the morning, they come to school, and then what do you have? So, veteran Sudbury staff people, I can tell you, are a bit overwhelmed over the last 10 years by all these changes that we're seeing now. Because, all of a sudden we didn't have enough desktop computers, and now I can tell you quite honestly, the desktop computers are not used. Kids aren't on them. So what's going on and how to handle it in this kind of a community, which is a democratic community of staff and students, it was always challenging and dynamic at the same time. It's also, let's say, each person brings to the school their life experience. So when we sit down as a community to discuss, well, how are we going to deal with this? Now everybody wants to be on a computer. I mean, how do you even arrange the rotation, the sign-up sheets? And we used to have kids, there was pushing next to sign-up sheets because they needed to get to the space. I mean, there were actual, which we put a stop to through legislation in the school meeting. And people, came to understand that there's a new culture and we have to take care of ourselves. Today, what you see is you see kids taking out these devices. They're just all the time out. It's an extension, literally, of their body. The younger kids are more relaxed about it than our older kids. It just flows in and out of the day. They game. They sit with a tablet. They sit with a whole bunch of kids all around the same tablet. I'm talking about 6, 7, 8 years old. High school students, age students, are sitting on the couches, and somebody says something, and then somebody, I'll check that. This is all the behaviors that we do in society. But it's just constant. Like if you literally walk in and you see the what we call the salon, a living room area, comfortable seating. Some days you see kids like this, and some days you see people talking with the phones in their hands. And you wonder, what are people going to think when they walk in our school and they see people always with a device? And the big question is, why don't we regulate this? Because we could regulate it as a community, right? We could say, well, let's say in the 2 hours in the morning, no devices in public spaces. We could do these things. We don't. And the question is, why don't we? It's also related. We don't also regulate sugar consumption, right? Maybe you can do it a bit, and sort of saying, well, if somebody wants to serve a meal from the public kitchen and sell it, a corporation, well, they have to have also a healthy, less sugary kind of alternatives at the beginning. Okay, what I would like to do is to open the slides. And we're going to start from the basic kernel, the basics of, we're going to have it up in a second. The simplest ideas about what self-directed education means. The sources from the Sudbury Valley School website in Sudbury, Massachusetts. And it will come up. Peter Gray talks a lot about this. You've got all these people in all these smaller societies that are subsistence societies, and how do the kids learn? And they learn by watching the adults, basically. Peter has a lot to say about this, but that's basically the idea. Could you go to the next slide? Right? respect the ability of every student, regardless of age, to plan and carry out their daily activities. We do not encourage students to follow particular paths, nor do we provide assessment of their performance. Sometimes they do assessment, but it's more self-assessment. They just want to know, did they make grammar mistakes in an essay, or ask somebody, what do you think of my painting? You know, but it's there's not a staff, an adult person assessing anything. And so these are the basic ideas. This is really it in a nutshell. Putting aside democratic processes, because everybody's always fascinated about the democracy in our schools, but the democracy is just the way we run ourselves. It's never, it's not the primary purpose of the school. The primary purpose is to do these things and allow the kids to explore their world in this way, which is their way. That's the only way. And so those are the two ideas that I just want us to keep in mind. So it's very important that parents, when they enroll their children in the Sudbury School, understand these principles. And I know that when I read them 25 years ago, I thought I understood. But I can tell you that raising kids and working with kids in this environment deepened it to such a degree that it seems simple, but it's heavily nuanced and very complex. It's very easy to screw it up. It's extremely easy to make a mess of this. And it takes a lot of commitment in the self-directed education to really stick with it and to constantly look at it and ask yourselves questions about what you're doing. And the questions are, when you look at screens and you stare around screens, then you've got something here. You've got something that's challenging society and the parents and consequently the kids, the schools, the staff. Okay, so I want to give you just a couple of examples of how this is implemented in our school. The issue of screens. So the first example would be the TRIP Corporation, the TRIP Committee in our school. So I was very active in that when my knees were better and my back was a little stronger. And we had a situation where we're all of a sudden seeing these devices on trips. And so I felt, first of all, when you're hiking, it's a safety issue. And also I felt that it was taking away from the togetherness of the trip. All of a sudden, people. So I was the chairperson of this committee, and although believe me, they didn't let me get away with anything. And I proposed that we ban the phones on trips, and they asked me why, and I said, well, I think for those two reasons. And then the kids said, well, no, that's not going to fly. First of all, it's my right to bring a phone. It's my phone, and you can't tell me what to do. It's not my place. Secondly, the phone, first of all, people take photos with the phone. Or maybe there's something going on in the family and they want to know what's going on. Or they feel they need to talk to their mom or dad or a sibling or I don't know. So, you know, I talked to them and I started to understand more about their concerns. And we came up with, okay, just when you're hiking, when you're actually walking, you can't use a phone. When you're stopped on a break, you can take out your phone. I wasn't happy with the decision, but I, through the discussion, began to understand their point of view. Second example, charging phones. So we got to the situation where there were phones charging in every single room all the time, and it was annoying because people were constantly sitting somewhere in a chair and somebody would reach over you and pull out the cord and take out the phone. Some people were concerned about health issues. It seemed like a mess, and it needed something to some kind of intervention. So the intervention we had our veterinarian did research, and she came up with a proposal. She's also our safety, and we have a security clerkship as well. And she proposed that it be regulated to certain areas which people, won't interfere with daily life. And if you want and you're alone in a room, you can do it. It's no problem. The free range chargers said that they deserve the right. It's why regulate this. They were upset but they were in the minority because there were so many people who were unhappy with the situation. And in the end, it went to regulation, and there's only certain areas you can charge your phone, and if you're in a room with other people, you have to ask permission, and there's all kinds of, there's solutions. Content. So in America, I think people are more, there's more of a sensitivity towards parental rating. That's my feeling. And in Europe, there's less of that sense. Israel is somewhere in between Europe and the United States. So I started looking into parental ratings and content. So you can't view pornography in the school. Okay, it's just not allowed. Other things like horror movies, shoot 'em up films, violence, action films, things like that. What we came up with was, if you wish to reserve a room and show a movie, you have to do this the day before. You have the day before the movie shows, you have to write a description, brief description of the movies, and mention if there's difficult scenes that you should know about, some basic information about the film. Very simple. We got rid of parental rating because if you look at a show like The Simpsons, which I personally don't consider a problem, but if you examine The Simpsons, so in America it's 12 plus. In Norway they don't care. In Israel they go by the American ratings, and it just seemed to me, well, what do you choose? Which rating system do you use? So we base this whole thing on trust. Now, the one thing we want to prevent is accidental exposure to content that a child does not wish for. So if you've reserved a room, there's no problem. There's a sign up, there's a room, people come up, they come watch the movie, there's just no problem. But what about individuals with laptop screens? So the rule is, if you're watching a film that's not general audience, the screen must be facing a wall. So if someone walks by, they don't see what's on your screen. Very, very simple and elegant solution. And that works very well for content. We do not use any network nanny type systems. We found them restrictive. We rely on the students, the kids, the staff to be responsible. And every once in a while something happens, and it's dealt with in our judicial committee, and I'm very proud of the way we deal with these things. It's very interesting in the judicial committee because all of a sudden you have a discussion about words and content, and there's little kids on the judicial committee. So there's always a little challenge about how to deal with that, but it's minor, and we deal with it just well. Alrighty. So we have these two rules that we looked at, the two ideas, principles, and we have the discussions in the school. So we've talked about staff, student behavior. Now let's give it a minute to talk about what happens when parents, kids, and staff are involved. And I wrote a little play, and I need 2 volunteers because I've already given Aryeh a part. Come on up. And believe me, listen, it's a stupid play. Okay, and the humor is like pretty low level because that's what I go for always. And I need one more person, or I'll have to read a part. Okay. Woo, thank you. Okay. So let's assign roles. The first one is Tyrion. I took the names from Game of Thrones because I thought it would be cute. And he's not Tyrion's size, so I'm making Arya Tyrion. And you're Sansa. You're Tyrion's mom. And you'll be Daenerys Targaryen, all right? Queen of Dragons, Mother of Dragons, and a staff member who happens to like math. I'm the narrator. Okay. Scene 1, at home. Sansa?
9 years old.
Oh.
9 years old.
Oh, sorry, I didn't say that.
Oh.
No, you didn't read that. Tyrion is 9 years old and spends half his school day playing Minecraft. Okay, now we're after the narrator part. Scene 1, at home. Sansa?
Tyrion, my son, whom I love very much, if you want to continue attending this school, I have one request.
And what might that be, Mother?
You may spend up to 1 hour a day on the computer, provided that you complete 2 pages of this math workbook every day in school.
Mother, that sounds so difficult. And since you are my parental unit, who I love so very much, and it is difficult to say no to you, which may bring me some undesired consequences, I will take the path of least resistance and say, okay.
Scene 2, at school. Tyrion?
Daenerys, oh, favorite staff member of mine, would it be possible to study math with you?
Sure, young Tyrion. That sounds like fun. Perhaps we can meet tomorrow at 1 p.m. sharp in the quiet room.
Smashing.
Scene 3, at school the next day. That's instructions.
Oh, where has my young Tyrion gone? Oh, where can he be?
2 hours later, they accidentally bump into each other.
Tyrion, I waited for you, but you never showed.
I forgot I was playing Minecraft.
Cool. Do you still want to meet about math?
Sure, I so really want to.
See you tomorrow
Oh, that's
at 1
that's
o'clock
really
in the quiet room. We also pluralize math.
We also say maths.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All criticism will be held till the end of the speech. For the sake of efficiency and brevity, Tyrion does not show up again, and Daenerys drops the issue. After all, this is self-directed education, and she has no agenda here. Scene, whatever, at the school. Sansa asks for a meeting with Daenerys and Tyrion in order to discuss some doubts.
Daenerys, so nice of you to meet me.
So what's on your mind, Lady Sansa?
Though you are not my queen, I would like to discuss a problem with you. Young Tyrion tells me that you are not showing up to math lessons, which he scheduled with you.
That's interesting. Tyrion, would you like to explain to your mama what is going on?
Tyrion looks at the floor and covers his face in shame. So the truth comes out. The end. Okay. Thank you very much. I didn't give you much choice, but I do appreciate it. Okay. Unfortunately, these things happen all the time in our schools. They do. I wish, I obviously made light of it, but it happens, and it's usually intense and quite a conflict. A kid can't say no to the parents. You can't put the parent against the school. I mean, it's done, it happens, but it doesn't work, and the kids will generally choose the parent and their perspective, their point of view, and adopt it as their own, and lie to get out of anything that's uncomfortable for them. And so these things happen. We chose screens to talk about, but really it's quite anything. We've had kids that showed up. There was this Bible thing going on in our school, and a kid showed up at the very end and said, "Oh, I have to be here. You have to help me complete this work page with, my mom told me." And the person, my friend Shosh, looked at the kid and said, "Do you want to do this work page?" He goes, "No." She goes, "Then I don't particularly want to help you." And you have to talk to your mom about it. And the parent will come in and my wife with English, she works with English. We don't have so many classes, by the way, but she works with kids in English. And people will say, "No, you just didn't show up for the meeting. She doesn't come, she doesn't tell me." And that's not the truth. It's not. And these things often come out. And the reason that this is a problem is because, again, we get back to values. We have very specific values, which we read here on the screen, and they're very clear. But parents have trouble accepting them sometimes. And the kid is told one thing by the parent and one thing by the school. If that continues in this environment of self-directed education, if that continues, then the child will end up leaving the school. That's pretty much always the case. Sometimes you can bring a parent around, but usually not. And it's unfortunate. And the kid, honestly, the kid's the one that's suffering. It's not me as a staff person, and it's not really the parents. It's the kid who's suffering, and he has to choose his parents or her parents. There's no choice. So, we try to avoid that as much as possible by educating parents. And it's just I wish it wouldn't happen, but it happens all the time. And the mutual respect still has to be present. And once you send your kid to a self-directed educational setting, then you have to accept that you can't do things like that, which we've described here. So we don't treat screens or sugar any differently. We trust the kids to figure this out. And we have a lot of sympathy for parents. Please come up and argue with us. We prefer arguments to avoidance. And sometimes, you know, we learn a thing or two, but in general, there's a lot the parents and the families have to adjust in order to send your kids to such an environment, such a place. But it's worth it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions? No, seriously, if there's anything. You can ask about anything else. I mean, I'm in Israel. There's things that go on. You can ask about that. It's very different to run there are major differences to run a Sudbury school in Israel. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Are you curious?
I can ask one question. What are sort of what are the activities, or what, when the parent walks through the door with a child, what do they see? What do they see the kids doing? You see an English prep sort of class?
Yeah.
Are there static things that you guys actually do?
So let me explain what my wife's development of her English. Well, you know, when Sudbury Valley was founded, they put out a course catalog. And then they found the kids weren't taking the courses. Nobody really wanted them. So they dropped that very quickly. But when we started, we have... you guys have private school here, really? So you get, because of that, you get a lot of benefits that we don't have. And all the European Sudbury community has these problems of regulation by the government. And there are no private schools. But we felt this need to provide everything they asked for. If a kid would say, I need a class in physics because I want to take the physics matriculation exam. Well, we just did head over heels, running around, trying to get them their physics class. Okay? In the case of English, my wife would teach English classes. She had many classes a week. You know, some little kids, they like to learn cursive writing. Now they don't care to learn English, they just want to learn cursive. It's more like a calligraphy class. So she didn't understand that in the beginning, but she used to run classes like that, conversational English for the younger kids, a little more writing and expository stuff for the older kids. And over the years, she decided she cut back on the classes. If a kid wants English, she's a resource. First of all, there's many ways to get English. It's a good example. First, English nowadays, kids all over the world often learn English to a higher level than they know their own native tongues because of the internet. It's really funny. Kids can read and write in English better than they read and write in Hebrew from Hebrew-speaking families. So what she developed was, so if people are interested in conversational English, then she says to them, well, okay, so you put a note on the board, you do it, and we can do something together. It could be fun, maybe, that kind of a thing. For the kids that want to learn for the matriculation, then they do work on their own or with a friend. They bring her the work. If they talk about an essay, they come to write an essay. Then she'll go over it with them. But if they don't bring the essay, she doesn't run after them. So what you've seen in the last years, if you walk into the school, is so you see people talking all over the place. You see kids on devices. You see kids reading a book. Kids outside playing some game. Lots of committee meetings, school meetings, JC every day, right? The judicial committee every day. It's hard to believe there's 130 kids at this school. Most days it's so quiet you don't know where. You say, well, where is everybody? And then other days are hell. But usually they're followed by very quiet days. So we have open days for the school. People come. You have similar events. I don't know, and parents come with their kids, and sometimes grandparents come, and we describe the school. And we have lots of kids who talk about their experience in the school. And if somebody were to ask my wife when she was running this, they would say, well, tell me the classes you have. She would refuse to answer. Now, that seems a little cruel and cold because there were classes. Some. Much less now than, But the reason she says that is because don't get your expectations up that there will be a class, that your child will be interested in the class, and even if they're interested, that they'll continue with this class. That's an unreasonable expectation. Classes are, or I would prefer to call them cooperative educational opportunities or something like that. Interest groups, cooperative interest groups, because it's not necessarily what one would consider a particular discipline. It's just people are interested in different things. They get together, and it's very dynamic. It comes and goes according to the needs of the community, and staff people do not chase after the kids. Sometimes I want to know if some people aren't coming. If I was doing something, I would want to know if their intention is to continue coming, because I don't want to waste my time. In this setting, if it was just one or two kids, it can be a little more dynamic, a little more informal, and we can just be together. I personally didn't teach classes. I did seminars, and everybody was responsible for bringing what they knew or preparing, and that was my thing. But there's less and less classes. We had a schedule out, open schedule on the board, rooms, and it really wasn't a class schedule, but which rooms are assigned on which days, which things. So JC gets its room, school meeting gets a room, committees get rooms, corporations get rooms, and sometimes D&D, they reserve a room, or movies, birthday parties get rooms, and sometimes there's things like English. Math less, because people are doing online math courses. There's no reason so much to do math, but if you know, like Lisa, a young woman who grew up in my house literally, my daughter's best friend who loves math, they know that if they want to talk about algebra, calculus, or whatever, they can just go to Lisa and just hang out, and it'll be much more fun than just the two of them, or maybe three of people hanging out and talking. So the other thing is, Pete, you don't know what you're going to get any day. It's like there are no 2 days that resemble each other, and they're so different. As a staff person, I was exhausted after every day of working, which is why I retired. But the kids also. So let's give you an example of really how it works. Let's say, so I'm with a group of kids, and it's a new endeavor they're interested in doing, learning about something with me because I like it. Fantasy literature, okay? And we have an introductory gathering. We get together, and then we say, okay, so when are we going to meet? Let's meet once a week, And everybody, no, I take out my calendar, and several other kids will take out a calendar, and another kid, they know what they do, and we can't find a time to meet because they're busy. They're very busy. Now, this isn't the young kids. Young kids is a very different ballgame, because young kids are basically very happy campers playing and doing things that they love to do, and will sometimes drop in on something just to sit on the lap of somebody, or because they have a particular relationship with a person. But they won't go to class, but they'll go to ceramics when Rena's in the ceramics room. But it's all very dynamic and changes, and I'm very happy if they come or not come to my activities. If we bring in an outside person, then there's financial issue, and if they don't show up to class without a reasonable excuse, they pay money. The equivalent of what it costs to bring that person is their particular amount, 20 shekels or 40 shekels, depending on how much the class costs and how many participants they have. But they get fined because we brought in somebody from the outside based on your. But if they don't come to my class, I don't care. I mean, really don't care. I'm curious. That's different. I ask out of curiosity because I just I have a relationship with them, but I don't care. I'm not invested in that. So when you ask a question like, what do the kids do and stuff like that, there's so many things they do, and then there's nothing. They're talking, they're playing. And the most exposure to the world of ideas and facts and philosophy is done at the dining room table. That's where the action is. So, if that answers the question for you. I'm very passionate about this. Dining room table is a great place to be. It really is.
So you said you had 5 children, and 3 went to Sudbury and 2 didn't?
Yeah.
So do you see any difference in those children that didn't go to Sudbury compared to those who did?
So I'm an immigrant to the United States. From the United States to Israel. And I was involved with some other immigrants who exposed me to the Sudbury Valley, the Sudbury Self-Directed education. And I didn't have the confidence that we could start a school. And when we got sick of it, sick of the education that my kids were going through. It's hard to describe. The teachers are more technocrats. They're like functionaries to bring workbooks so they can perform well on standardized tests. I mean, literally that's what we were seeing. And then we started the school, and it was very hard, and culturally it was hard for us because unlike all the other democratic schools, Sudbury schools in the country, we're the only group that started with a group of immigrants, Anglos, that did it. Anglos, we call ourselves Anglo-Saxons or whatever, which is not true, but English speakers in this case. And so is there a difference? No, because in the family we compensated for this. First of all, we decided, for instance, when my kids came home from school, all the years they were in school, even the 3 that attended, we would say, well, if you have homework, I'm here. And then the teachers would say, but your kids don't do their homework. I say, well, they know I'm here if they want it. You talk to them. It's not my business. And they would be very frustrated with us. Personal days, whenever they wanted. You know, I couldn't be all the time because I'm interested in it a little, but, you know, if they wanted a personal day, that's fine. And we understood their frustration. So, no, what I can tell you is my kids, and I say this with humility and gratitude, that they're all doing things they're passionate about. And it doesn't matter if they went to the school or didn't go to the school, but I think it has, the family was the issue. And in fact, honestly, if I look at the kids in the school and all the kids that I've known, they are so much more similar to their parents than anything else out there. Parents are the biggest influence. That's why if, you know, kids, I told you, Arya, you didn't ask me the question, but I remember now that there was a question. We've had kids in recent 5 years that complain about their parents being on their devices. Okay? That's where we're at. That's where we're at. Somebody came in and said, my kid's on there playing games all the time. I said, well, Eudes was there. What do you do when you come home from work? He goes on his computer, checks his email, you know. So we had another parent, you know, some of our parents, we have I don't want to call it fundamentalist religion, it's not, but it's Orthodox Jewish, and they're very involved in the things they're supposed to do, the mitzvot, the commandments that they have to observe. And so one parent said, well, I don't want to send, my good friend said, I don't want to send my kids to your school because you don't every day have morning prayers. We said, well, they can organize if they want, but no, we don't. We don't have mandatory morning prayers. We don't have mandatory anything that's relating to content. And we said, but do you go to services every morning? He goes, no, I want you to do it for me. You know, that's not going to work. I mean, if you don't do it yourself, why would you expect your child to do it? So we raised our family, you know, with all these things in mind. And I'm just very happy for the kids. I mean, really, they're all doing things they really want to do, or they're trying to figure it out, which isn't easy. Freedom is hard. It's not easy. You had a question?
Yeah, in the presentation that Peter Gray gives, that Kara plays this video where he goes over the principles that facilitate the Sudbury model, and one of them is the freedom to do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
And my sense is then from that, kids learn that they figure out, well, if I don't make it happen for me, then it's not going to happen. So they learn to take responsibility for themselves. And I was always wondering if, like, how sense, like, if like 5 minutes a week they're told what to do, is that like, do they never develop responsibility? Is it like super sensitive, or, in other words, like if you had a school that was almost Sudbury, but like they had like a mandatory prayer class, would it work not nearly as well because the kids wouldn't have that unrestricted, and then they wouldn't develop responsibility? Or is it like more like gradual? Like,
yeah, well, we do have things that we demand from the kids, but they're things we demand from ourselves. In other words, everyone in the community makes a decision about them. So there's chores to clean up, right? We have chores every day. It's, you know, you don't have to do it every week, but a couple weeks a year you're assigned chores. JC, Judicial Committee, things like that. Kids love when we have fire drills. They absolutely love it. Earthquake, we have 3 kinds of drills in Israel. earthquake drills, fire drills, and missile drills. Okay? Something doesn't happen here so much. But the kids actually like it because we're telling them what to do. They find it very novel. But they're very good at doing the things they need to do. But we really look at, everything so very deeply. If it's something that is reasonable to demand or the law requires it, in some cases, the drills are by law, it's mandated by law. We don't have a choice. It's the right thing to do, obviously, but it's mandated by law. Everybody understands it. I see here is where I have an advantage over maybe what you guys have. And that is, I see all the democratic schools, which do what you're saying, what you're suggesting is as an idea, right? What you're raising, meaning that there's things that they have to do that are maybe content oriented.
That's what I'm getting more at, not
Yeah.
the drills with JC or
I understand that, but since I'm talking to a general audience as well,
Sure.
I thought I'd give it a shot.
Sure.
So, and when our kids meet their kids, because we're part of the network and they get together for social events mostly, the kids from the other schools are very jealous of ours. They're very jealous. And they think that, they feel that they're being, where they appreciate their school very much, for sure, but they feel that there's a bit of inauthenticity in it, lack of authenticity. Meaning, yeah, they don't walk the walk. What is it? Talk the talk and walk the walk.
These are schools that claim to be self-directed in some sense?
They're largely self-directed. So the kids are resenting the lack of that there is direction. Why do I have to choose a mentor? Now, not all the kids. A lot of the kids, okay. So a good example is matriculation. We have no investment in the kids matriculating. You don't have to, by the way. It's fine not to. They are the ones that decide to take the matriculation exams. By the way, it's like 7, 8, 9 exams you sit for. It's a lot of pressure. If it doesn't have to be, but it is a fair amount of pressure for the kids. And these kids our kids, when they decide to do a test, they sit down, they study for 2 weeks, and they get, most of them, really decent grades. It's amazing how easy it is. Kids who've been studying for years the same material don't always do so great, but our kids are performing pretty well, 85s and above, 80, 85, and it's a bit shocking. The other kids are completely reliant on the staff making these classes for them so that they can pass these tests. It's not mandatory in the sense that they have choice, but they're not taking ownership of their own education. That's the big difference. So a kid might walk out and say, I wish the school had done more to help me with this test or this thing. Younger kids, by the way, this is just, the self-direction doesn't become a big problem until you hit something like matriculation. It's just a non-issue because...
Explain matriculation.
It's like the Regents in New York. It's kind of like an SAT test, but for high school students, to finish high school. And then we have tests for college, which is after the Army. But that's the matriculation exam.
So it's like maybe like our EP exams. It's like content, like a test on physics, a test on...
Yeah, math. There's some basic things that they test on, and then there's some more advanced stuff they test on. So what we see is that our kids really, if they really believe in what we're doing together, then they take full responsibility. They figure out how to study. They ask for a teacher. Like Arabic is a language hard to study by yourself. Arabic. It's the literary Arabic that they're studying, but it's hard to do that. So they get the resources. They have a teacher come in. Physics is another problem. Generally, things like math. There's all kinds of computerized systems, for learning self. That literally you just get online, and the lessons are great, and they have people to ask. They figure it out for themselves, and they're empowered. These kids in the other school are matriculating, but they're totally reliant on other people to help them through it. Would a little bit of, I don't think a little bit would help in any way. I don't see the efficacy, is that the word, of doing anything mandatory in content that would help a kid solve the bigger problems in life. College, when you get to college, you've got to decide for yourself. If I'm in a work environment, now, since, and there's something coming out, I'm told, well, learn this stuff, and, and then you have to do this, whatever the subject matter is. That's in the high-tech area. I don't know about other types of work. I mean, I know about high-tech and primarily, but the jobs that I don't know where this figure comes from, but I've heard it around a lot, that in 10 years, 70% of the jobs that will exist in modern countries like the United States don't exist today. Something like that, whether it's 50%, 40%, 60 or 70. So what are we going to train these people for? I just don't see that there's any benefit to making anything mandatory. Recently I've been thinking, so somebody might argue reading. Reading is a skill that we say everybody needs. By the way, I've heard people argue that you don't need reading, but I'm kind of into the reading thing. I would like my kids to read. But as a parent, we're reading all the time. Read children's books to the kids. I read things online. I mean, kids are reading. It's just not a problem. But one could make an argument that reading is actually something, if they're not doing it, we have to intervene. Okay, I've heard that argument. So I was thinking about, like, babies, because I have a grandchild, and I spend 4 days a week watching her. I'm retired, but that's what I do. And it's really great. And I was watching her and seeing her start to crawl and comparing it and looking at the data of, like, when do kids crawl? So there's a significant difference in time when kids begin to crawl, some do, and in the normal range. When some kids begin and others begin later, right? So reading, people get, it's another subject that gets someone hysterical about parents. I understand, believe me. But if you look at the normal spread, many kids are within the norm anyway. So there's kids who read literally when they're 4 years old. And a lot of kids in self-directed education might begin at 10, 11, 12. We've never graduated a kid that can't read. Some of them really hate it. Some of them, for whatever reasons, a lot of them dislike it because they were pushed to read. The parents, my child has dyslexia, but I've seen kids with supposed dyslexia go on to write theses and do all kinds of other work and write plays and edit the plays. And so, so you ask yourself, is it worth it? Is it worth to take a risk of making some content mandatory in a context like ours? Is it worth the risk? My answer would be no, because it disempowers the child. That doesn't mean you can't talk to the kid. The parents would talk, a staff person. If a kid came to me and said, I don't read, I'm a staff person. I'm 10, 11, and I'm not reading. And I'm concerned about it, so I talk to them about their concern. But I'm not the parent. Again, it's harder for the parents, much harder. And their anxiety can overwhelm the child and then this young person feels this tremendous pressure, which is so totally counterproductive to the goal. And it doesn't work. And in the end, they hate it, and they fight it, and nobody benefits in later in life, and they think they're stupid. There's all these, it's so complex, this issue. But I don't think there's any benefit to it. Again, I'm not saying if there's some real neurological problem that exists, but there's so few. These things are overdiagnosed, so there's so few real neurological problems here. So I'm against compulsory content of any form, because I don't see the benefit. If I want my kids to know something as a dad, I talk about it at the dinner table. Then they say, oh, you talk about that all the time, you're boring. But I'll tell them what I think. I tell them, I think this is important, that you have to know something about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. No, I don't have to argue much, because they do understand. But I mean, if I, as a parent, I would say, I think you need to know some of the history. It's important. We're in this region, and it's important. So I bring up what I'm concerned about. It's very important to know how to make a fire, so that if you're ever in a survival situation, you need to know how to make the fire. That's important. These are my concerns.
Very good dad thing to be concerned about.
And if you need directions, you stop a taxi, and they'll tell you, we're going to the local grocery, because they know where everybody comes from. So I have very few lessons. My kids once asked me, Abba, that's Dad in Hebrew, they said, Abba, so now that you're older, I was maybe 40, 45. Yeah, I feel differently about it now. Now that you're older, so you really think you know everything? And I say, well, actually, I know less than when I was 20. Because in 20, we're pretty sure we know everything. And they were very upset about that. So I don't know if I have that much to teach, really. Any other questions? Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I hope you got some things. I got to learn this public speaking thing more, but the only way to do that is to do it. So, and I know I didn't wear purple, and I apologize. It's a better color for filming. So, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you're ever in Israel,